Hey friends, welcome back to another video. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about the books I read in May and the books I'm planning on reading in June. This video is a bit delayed because of what's happening in the world right now. I took a week off of posting regular content to focus on talking about Black Lives Matter and amplifying Black voices. So I'll say it here, and I'll say it a million times, as many times as I need to say it before it sinks in. Black Lives Matter. I have not been sharing my regular content, but have instead been promoting and sharing and amplifying Black creators and speakers and activists and human beings who have things to say. I've also been sharing as many resources as I can and daily anti-racist action for my followers to take. But that's not enough. That will never be enough. When innocent people are being murdered by the police just for the color of their skin, we won't forget them. We will say their names. If you are one of my Black subscribers, I want to thank you so much for being here. I will never fully understand your experience, but I want to be here for you, and I support you. To my white subscribers and viewers, I hope you're already signing petitions and donating your money and calling your local politicians. I hope you're already doing the work, the self-reflection, the difficult exploration of how you are part of white supremacy, to become a true ally and anti-racist. If you feel lost, if you don't know where to start, I have compiled a huge number of resources on my Instagram in my anti-racism highlight, which will be linked in the description box down below. If you don't have Instagram, if you can't access those resources, I've also made a separate blog post on my website, which will be linked down below. I would hope that none of my subscribers would have this mindset, but I want to address it here because I think it's up to us as white people to address and defend against this nefarious tactic being used to shut down the movement. I don't want to see "What about all lives?" or "All lives matter" in the comments of this video. Responding to Black Lives Matter with "All lives matter" is a form of gaslighting. You are trying to weaken the position of Black people who are trying to fight for their right to live because it makes you uncomfortable. There's also a thunderstorm happening here right now, so I apologize if there's some atmospheric background noise of thunder and rain. It's kind of cozy, though. So today I'm going to go through and talk about the books I read in May and what I'm reading in June. So the first book I read in May, sort of, was Oryx and Crake by Margaret Atwood. This was actually a book from my April TBR that I didn't finish by the time I posted that video, and I had to keep reading it into May, but I actually didn't end up finishing it. So I got about 50% of the way through the book, and I really wasn't connecting to any of the characters. I was having trouble staying invested and interested in what was happening. But I think the most important factor in me putting down the book was the backstory of one of the main characters, Oryx. It involved very graphic descriptions of sexual assault of minors, and that is something that, while it needs to be talked about, it has to be done with a certain level of sensitivity because of the subject matter, in my opinion, and I don't know that using it to add complexity to a fictional character is something that I'm okay with. So I completely understand if people disagree with me on this, but I really struggle with reading about any kind of abuse towards children in fiction when it doesn't have to be there. So I put down the book, and as of right now, I don't have any plans to finish it. The next book that was on my May TBR that I read was Acceptance by Jeff Vandermeer. This is the third book in the Southern Reach trilogy, though I've heard some rumblings about there potentially being a fourth book. I cannot confirm, but this may not in fact be a trilogy. I guess we'll see. So the first book of the Southern Reach trilogy I really enjoyed. I think I gave it 4 stars, and I will link the video somewhere where I talk about my experience of that book if you're interested. The second book, which I think I read last month, I enjoyed less. I still enjoyed it, but there were just things about it that kind of let me down after the first book and kind of what the first book had built. So I wasn't really sure what to expect of this third book. And I have to be honest, I think I have to reread the whole trilogy to have a real dynamic and in-depth opinion on it, because it's very complex, it's very abstract, it's sort of purposefully vague as well. So I think it's something that I kind of have to go through again with the knowledge of what comes later and build my opinion from there. I do think the entire trilogy was fascinating. I think the concept was really interesting. Looking at the third book specifically, it felt almost too vague and too specific at the same time. It almost felt like it could have been two separate books because it jumped around timelines and point of views and characters quite frequently, and there were sections that went into so much detail about things that didn't really feel important in the grand scheme of things, and then there were sort of important answers that we needed to understand what was happening that we never got, or that we got such a vague answer that it didn't really say anything. So I think this would have done well to be two separate books, one that was more of a prequel, focusing on what happened in the past, the development of Area X and some of those earlier exhibitions, and then a separate book for what happens with Control and Ghostbird when they go back into Area X. I think that would have allowed Vandermeer to go into more detail, into more aspects, and give us more of a whole picture of what's happening. Even if he wants to keep certain things vague on purpose, that's fine. But it almost felt like there wasn't enough time to address some of those things, or that he wasn't sure what the answer was, so he just left it vague instead, which was a bit frustrating as a reader. So as I said, I gave this book 3 stars. I still really enjoyed this entire trilogy, and I will be rereading it. So the next book I read in May, I'm pretty sure, was And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie. So this book I gave 4 stars, and I'm a bit conflicted because as far as the story goes, as far as the structure, the writing, the concept, I loved it. I thought it was so well thought out, it was so well crafted. I really enjoyed reading it. And I can understand why Agatha Christie is so lauded as an author. I have not read her other work, but I can see so many influences from this particular story on mysteries and thrillers that are being made even still today. So I really appreciated that aspect of it, but I did struggle quite a bit because there was a lot of racism and classism and sexism in this story. And as far as I can tell, as far as I remember, all of it was demonstrated by the characters themselves, which is something that, I mean, this is a conversation that comes up all the time, but at what point is the author being sexist, racist, homophobic, classist, whatever it is, and at what point are they writing a character that has those beliefs or traits? And it's a hard line to cross. I think it may be a little bit of both, considering the time period that this was written and considering the former titles of this book and some of the changes that have been made over the years to make it more palatable to a modern day audience by making it less overtly racist. So I struggle a lot with that. As the book stands now, it does feel like it is those characters having those values, those views, which makes sense for the time period this happens in, and the characters are not supposed to be likable, so there's that. But it is something that gives me pause and makes me a little reticent to continue to read Christie's work. I think it's a fine line to walk, especially when looking at classics or books written in the past. So I would love to hear your thoughts on this because I feel quite conflicted on this front. I gave the book 4 stars because I think the actual structure, the story, the writing is all really, really, really well done, and I understand why it's a classic. The next book I read in May was The Queen of the Night by Alexander Chee. This book I was really excited for. It focuses on an opera singer and her life in Paris, and unfortunately it just didn't work for me. I gave it 2 stars. I really, really wanted to like this book, but I just couldn't. It felt like a soap opera. This one person's life had so much happening in it that it just felt completely unbelievable. You know, it was enough for a whole cast of characters' backstories shoved into one single person, but even with all of her life experience, all of these things that have happened to her, everything she's gone through, she still felt pretty one-dimensional as a character somehow. She just doesn't have much of a personality. I don't know if I could even really describe her to you after spending that whole book with her and on her life. So unfortunately, I didn't particularly enjoy the book. I gave it 2 stars because I really liked the parts that focused more on her career as an opera singer, on her training, on her voice. I wish there had been more of that as a singer myself. I found that really interesting. And I was hoping I would get more of that out of a book that has an opera singer as a protagonist, but unfortunately, that was not the case. The next book I read in May was Shout by Laurie Halse Anderson, and I want to give a trigger warning. This book is about sexual assault, and my discussion of it will mention sexual assault. So if you would like to avoid this discussion, I'll put a timestamp here for you to skip to the next book. I want to read for you my favorite poem, my favorite verse from this book. After you speak, after you shout, your open mouth will breathe in the light for which you've hungered, and your backbone will unfurl until you can again dance to the beat of your steadfast heart. This book packs such a powerful punch for how short it is. I would highly recommend the audiobook because it is read by the author and there is just so much added to it from hearing the poetry from her own voice. It is such a raw, vulnerable, and strong piece of work, and it simultaneously made me feel such a deep sadness, but also an immense pride to be a woman and to be someone who has survived many of the obstacles that society has thrown in my way, and proud of other women who have survived so much more. I got so emotional listening to this book. I broke into sobs multiple times and I had to take breaks and try to work through the basically hysteria that I was feeling. And it made me really explore why I was getting such a visceral reaction. Obviously, hearing about someone experiencing sexual assault is awful and anyone should feel emotional in hearing that, but it was on another level. It felt like trauma. And while I have experienced sexual harassment and forms of sexual assault in my life, I have never been. It took me a while to realize that my reaction comes from a place of fear and from a place of knowledge. The odds are not in my favor that I will go my entire life without having that experience. And that is horrifying, it's terrifying, and it shouldn't be the way it is. We shouldn't have to live every day in fear of being sexually assaulted, knowing that if we are, it's likely we won't be believed, or that if we press charges, that the perpetrator will walk free. It's not okay, and I think everyone should be reading this book or listening to this book to get a deeper understanding of the trauma associated with sexual assault and why it's so important that we work to reform our justice system to protect survivors. The next book I read in May was Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. This book I gave 5 stars. It was absolutely gorgeous. Such a beautiful coming of age story full of loss and change and growth and despair and true unending love. I read Circe earlier this year and I adored it, so I'm not shocked that I enjoyed this book as well, because Madeline Miller has this magical ability to weave mythology and real-life experiences together in a way that really humanizes these gods and heroic characters of lore. You really feel transported to another world and time. And Achilles and Patroclus feel like real people that you could know in your day-to-day life, and their relationship feels real. Their love was nuanced and palpable, especially in all of those small moments, the touch of a hand or the way that the light hits their face and the feelings that those tiny moments can bring in you when you love someone. That really felt so genuine, and it felt like how I feel when I touch the hand of the person I love or the light hits their face just so. That's what it feels like to have a soulmate, and Madeline Miller captured it so beautifully in this story. I cried a lot reading this book, and I do not regret it. It's beautiful. I love the representation of the LGBTQ community, a beautiful, loving gay relationship. We need more stories that focus on these types of relationships. Achilles and Patroclus are soulmates, being represented in the most simple and honest way despite the grandeur of the setting. Okay, the next book I read in May was The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers, and oh my god, one of you recommended this book to me on a previous book video, TBR video, and I apologize, I cannot remember which one of you it was, but thank you so much. If you're watching this, please let me know in the comments that it was you, because I adored this book. 5 stars, one of my new favorites of all time. It was so good, so thank you so much for recommending it to me. Diverse aliens in space without unnecessary world-ending battles every 5 minutes. Just so up my alley, so up my alley. There was incredible world building in this. There were so many different types of aliens and they were incredibly well developed, not just in their physical appearance, which was more than just being humans with forehead ridges or something. They were very alien in a really cool way, and I appreciate that. But they also had fully developed cultures and social norms and boundaries, language, understanding, religion, so much depth to all of the different cultures that were included, and that was really fascinating to read about. I loved that. It was also very diverse, not just in the number of species that we saw, but also in gender expression, sexuality. That was really great to see, because the idea of a future that doesn't involve people of all kinds of genders and sexualities is just silly to me, especially when you consider a future with different species. I guarantee that different species are going to have different types of genders and different types of sexualities and views on gender and sexuality than we do. And I also hope that we in the future get better about accepting a variety of sexualities and gender expressions and gender identities. So I really appreciated that aspect of the book as well. So all of that was great, but the best part for me was the characters. By far, the characters were amazing. I honestly could relate to every single one of them for different reasons, even the ones that were supposed to be less likable or more villainous, I guess. I saw a couple reviews of people complaining that the characters were flat or they couldn't relate to them, and that really surprised me. But as I was writing my review, I had a thought, because the protagonists of the story are female identifying, and a lot of the primary characters are female identifying or non-gender conforming as far as our views on gender. And of the reviews that I saw where people were complaining about not connecting to the characters, they all appeared to be men. So I do wonder if some of that is men struggling to connect to characters that aren't male characters because they haven't learned to do that over the years. Men have been very spoiled with having stories of any genre focused on their experience from their point of view, while women and people of other gender identities have had to learn to identify with and relate to male characters because that was the majority of what we had available by far. So I do wonder if some of it is that, of men not really connecting to these female and non-binary or, more complex gender expressions that are not male. So just something to think about. If you are a man and you have read this book and you struggle to relate, I would ask you that question, because I found them very well developed and very relatable in a lot of ways. Not just the female characters and the non-gender conforming characters, but also the male characters. So now that I said that, I do want to mention some of my favorite characters for any of you who have read it. Sissix is number 1. She is a freaking badass. I love everything about her. Give me more. Thank you. Also, Dr. Chef was such a lovable, huggable, just pile of goo. I need that Grum in my life ASAP. I love him. I want all of the stories on him. And his backstory was so tragic and heartbreaking, but had such an important message behind it. So I just really appreciated his character all around. And Lovey, I cannot say too much about Lovey because I don't want to give spoilers, but Lovey is an AI, and I've always really enjoyed artificial intelligence in sci-fi as, sentient characters. Data, one of my faves of all time. So I really enjoyed the exploration of her character, and yeah, I don't want to give too much away, but Lovey's in my heart forever. Love her. And then Kizzy as well. It's funny because normally characters like Kizzy are the ones that annoy the heck out of me. Like those people who are so over the top bubbly and extroverted and energetic and, you know, always have a million things to say and do. Normally I find it a bit much, a bit overstimulating, but something about her heart and soul, the fact that she was so loyal, that she cared so much for her crew, and especially for Jenks, their depth of relationship that was basically a sibling relationship was just really beautiful, and she grew on me throughout the book, I have to say. And then my last favorite, I'm honestly surprised, but Rosemary, who is our protagonist. I was a bit worried about her at the beginning. She seemed a bit like a blank slate type of protagonist to sort of slot yourself into as a reader, but she really grew throughout the book. She really started to show who she truly was, her openness and empathy and strength. So yeah, Rosemary really surprised me. Her growth, her journey throughout the book was really beautiful to see. And honestly, I could keep doing this forever. I could list literally every single character as my favorite probably, so I'm gonna stop now. I'm gonna stop. All I'm gonna say is that I love that this book manages to explore such complex, human, serious issues without coming off as preachy, and focused on relationships and characters instead of space battles every 5 minutes. I'm so sick of sci-fi that is just about battles for the universe. It felt like a mix between classic Star Trek, like original series, and TNG era Star Trek, and DS9, my favorite, and Firefly, that kind of vibe. It was just incredible, and I would recommend it to anyone. So next we have Sapiens, A Brief History of Humankind by Yuval Noah Harari. This one I am about 50% of the way through. I ended up restarting this to listen with my husband, kind of like what happened with Born a Crime. He was really interested in this. This is the type of book that's right up his alley. So we've been listening in small chunks every day when we get the chance. So it's taking us a while to get through it. So this one I'm going to keep reading for as long as it takes us to get through it, and I'll mention it in whatever video aligns with when we finish it. And the last one that was on my May TBR was Les Fiancés de l'Hiver by Christelle Dabo, and this one I didn't end up getting to in May, so I'm shifting it into my June TBR. It's one of my 8 books for June. So with that being said, I think it's time for me to talk you through my June TBR. So in June, I will be reading Les Fiancés de l'Hiver by Christelle Dabo. Ophelia lives on Anima. Beneath her worn scarf and thick glasses, the young girl hides the ability to read and communicate with the souls of objects, and the power to travel through mirrors. Her peaceful existence is disrupted when she is promised in marriage to Thorn from the powerful dragon clan. Ophelia must leave her family and follow her fiancé to the floating capital on the distant arc of the pole. She has become a pawn in a deadly plot. I will also be reading Middle Game by Seanan McGuire. This is actually my book club's first book selection. If you didn't hear, I started a book club on my Patreon. If you're interested in joining, you can. Initially, I was planning on posting this video closer to the beginning of the month, where it would have made more sense for people to join in if they were interested. Now, obviously, we're a little bit later in the month, but if you would still like to join and read along with us, get caught up, feel free. There's a link in my description box down below to join Patreon, and you can join the book club tier. Meet Roger. Skilled with words, languages come easily to him. He instinctively understands how the world works through the power of story. Meet Dodger, his twin. Numbers are her world, her obsession, her everything. All she understands, she does so through the power of math. Roger and Dodger aren't exactly human, though they don't realize it. They aren't exactly gods either. Not entirely. Not yet. Godhood is attainable. Pray it isn't attained. I'm also reading Me and White Supremacy, Combat Racism, Change the World, and Become a Good Ancestor by Layla F. Saad. This is more of a workbook that is meant to help those with white privilege to learn what that really means, what white supremacy really is, and how to work to understand that in a more deep and complex way, and to turn that understanding and our privilege around to become advocates and true allies and anti-racists. I'll also be reading The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle by Stuart Turton. Tonight, Evelyn Hardcastle will be killed. Again. As fireworks explode overhead, Evelyn Hardcastle, the young and beautiful daughter of the house, is killed. But Evelyn will not die just once. Until Aidan, one of the guests summoned to Blackheath for the party, can solve her murder, the day will repeat itself over and over again, every time ending with a fateful pistol shot. The only way to break the cycle is to identify the killer, but each time the day begins again, Aidan wakes in the body of a different guest, and someone is determined to prevent him ever escaping Blackheath. A Gathering of Shadows by V.E. Schwab, the second book in the Shades of Magic series. It's been 4 months since a mysterious obsidian stone fell into Kel's possession. Now, restless after having given up his smuggling habit, Kel is visited by dreams of ominous magical events, waking only to think of Layla, who disappeared from the docks as she always meant to do. As Red London finalizes preparations for the Element Games, an extravagant international competition of magic meant to entertain and keep healthy the ties between neighboring countries, a certain pirate ship draws closer, carrying old friends back to port. But the balance of magic is ever perilous, and for one city to flourish, another London must fall. The Test by Sylvain Nouvel. Britain, the not-too-distant future. Adair is sitting the British citizenship test. He wants his family to belong. 25 questions to determine their fate. 25 chances to impress. When the test takes an unexpected and tragic turn, Adair is handed the power of life and death. How do you value a life when all you have is multiple choice? Dry by Neil Shusterman. The drought, or the tap-out as everyone calls it, has been going on for a while now. Everyone's lives have become an endless list of don'ts. Don't water the lawn. Don't fill up your pool. Don't take long showers. Until the taps run dry. Suddenly, Alyssa's quiet suburban street spirals into a war zone of desperation. Neighbors and families turned against each other on the hunt for water. And when her parents don't return and her life, and the life of her brother, is threatened, Alyssa has to make impossible choices if she's going to survive. And Pride by Abizaboy. Zuri Benitez has pride, Brooklyn pride, family pride, and pride in her Afro-Latino roots. But pride might not be enough to save her rapidly gentrifying neighborhood from becoming unrecognizable. When the wealthy Darcy family moves in across the street, Zuri wants nothing to do with her 2 teenage sons, even as her older sister, Janae, starts to fall for the charming Ainsley. She especially can't stand the judgmental and arrogant Darius. Yet, as Zuri and Darius are forced to find common ground, their initial dislike shifts into an unexpected understanding. But with 4 wild sisters pulling her in different directions, cute boy Warren vying for her attention, and college applications hovering on the horizon, Zuri fights to find her place in Bushwick's changing landscape, or lose it all. So those are all of my books on my June TBR. A few of them I've already been reading, such as Middle Game with my book club, or Me and White Supremacy as I work through that. So please let me know in the comments if you've read any of the books that I mentioned in this video, and also just what you're reading in general. Or, as always, if you have any recommendations for me, I would love to know. As always, I'll link all the books in the description box down below if you'd like to check them out, as well as my Goodreads page if you want to add me as a friend on there, see my reviews as I go along. Thank you so much for watching this video, for being here, and for being lovely humans, and I'll see you very soon in my next one. Bye, friends. I want to take a moment to give a heartfelt thank you to my patrons for their support. Extra special thanks to our newest patrons, Stacy, Julie, Sarah, Macon, Dietland, Angela, Kat, Dara, Jenny, Leslie, Jocelyn, Erin, Kelly, Catherine, and Anique. Welcome all of you to the squad. I am so excited to see so many new faces. If you at home want to join the squad, feel free. There's a link in the card and in the description box down below. Please don't forget to check out the links in my description box to learn more about how you can help with the Black Lives Matter movement. I would also love to know if you are one of my Black subscribers or viewers, if you have your own Instagram or YouTube channel where you create art, lettering, bullet journal type content. Please let me know in a comment because I would love to use my platform to uplift more voices and make sure that our community here online is representative of those of us who are part of the community offline.